The Art of War, Sun Tzu's Timeless Strategies for Life, Business, and Success by the Audiobook Space. Over 2,500 years ago, in ancient China, a general sat alone and wrote something. Not a poem, not a history, not a political declaration. He wrote a manual, a precise, ruthless, extraordinarily practical manual on how to win. Not just wars, everything. His name was Sun Tzu, and what he wrote in those 13 short chapters has been studied, memorized, and applied by every serious student of power, strategy, and success in every era of human civilization since. Julius Caesar studied it. Napoleon studied it. Mao Zedong carried it into battle. General Douglas MacArthur kept a copy on his desk. Steve Jobs applied its principles to build Apple. Bill Gates read it annually. The most successful hedge fund managers on Wall Street study it as seriously as any financial text. And here is the question that has fascinated historians, strategists, and philosophers for 25 centuries. How? How does a text written 2,500 years ago, before electricity, before gunpowder, before the printing press, remain more relevant, more applicable, and more urgently true than books written last year? The answer is both simple and profound. Because Sun Tzu was not really writing about war. He was writing about human nature. And human nature has not changed in 2,500 years. Today, we are going to go through every principle in the art of war, every chapter, every strategy, and we are going to show you exactly how each one applies to your life, your business, your relationships, and your pursuit of success right now. Let's begin. Before we enter the text itself, let us establish who Sun Tzu was and why his words carry the weight they do. Sun Tzu, whose name translates roughly as Master Sun, was a Chinese military general, strategist, and philosopher who lived during the spring and autumn period of ancient China, approximately 544 to 496 BCE. He served the King of Wu, one of the most powerful rulers of his era, as a military commander. His battlefield record was extraordinary. He transformed a relatively weak state into a dominant military power through the application of strategic principles so refined and so counterintuitive that his contemporaries regarded him with something approaching awe. But his greatest legacy was not his victories on the battlefield. It was the 13 chapters he wrote, The Art of War, a text so dense with strategic insight that scholars have spent centuries unpacking its implications. The text is short, remarkably short. In its entirety, it is approximately 13,000 Chinese characters, roughly 6,000 English words. You could read it in an afternoon. Chapter 1. Laying Plans. Know before you go. Sun Tzu opens The Art of War with what is perhaps his most fundamental and most frequently violated principle. All warfare is based on deception. Before anything else, before strategy, before tactics, before the first move is made, there is deception, the management of what your opponent knows and does not know about your intentions, your capabilities, and your plans. But before that principle even applies, Sun Tzu identifies 5 factors that he says every commander must master before engaging in any conflict. The moral law, the degree to which the people are in harmony with their leader, so united in purpose that they will follow without fear of danger. Heaven, timing, the conditions of the environment, day and night, heat and cold, the changing seasons. Earth, terrain, the distances involved, the ground to be crossed, the physical realities of the battlefield. The commander, the qualities of the leader, wisdom, sincerity, benevolence, courage, and strictness. Method and discipline, the organization of the army, the system of supply, the control of resources. These 5 factors, assessed honestly and compared against those of the enemy, will tell you, Sun Tzu says, Who will win before a single blow is struck? Apply this to modern life. Before you launch a business, assess these 5 factors. Do your team genuinely believe in the mission? That is moral law. Are you launching at the right time in the market cycle? That is heaven. Do you understand your competitive landscape and your distribution channels? That is earth. Are you the right leader for this venture? Do you have the skills, the character, the resilience it demands? That is the commander. Do you have the systems, the funding, the operational capacity to sustain the effort? That is method and discipline. Most businesses fail not because the idea was bad, but because the assessment of these 5 factors was never honestly done. The founder was too excited, too optimistic, too attached to the vision to look clearly at the terrain before charging into it. Sun Tzu would not have been surprised. He identified this failure mode 2,500 years ago. Plan thoroughly, assess honestly, know before you go, and then deceive, not dishonestly in the ethical sense, but strategically. Let your competitors underestimate you. Let the market see only what serves your position. Appear weak when you are strong. Appear strong when you are weak. Appear inactive when you are preparing your most decisive move. The general who wins is the one who's already won in the planning room before the battle begins. Chapter 2. Waging War: The Economics of Conflict. Sun Tzu's second chapter contains one of his most startling and most consistently relevant insights. There is no instance of a nation benefiting from prolonged warfare. He was talking about armies, but he might as well have been talking about every prolonged conflict in every domain of human endeavor. The lawsuit that drags on for years, consuming legal fees, management attention, emotional energy, and organizational focus until both parties have spent more fighting than the original dispute was worth. The business rivalry that extends so long it exhausts both competitors, opening the market to a third party who steps in while the giants are distracted fighting each other. The personal conflict, the grudge, the family feud, the workplace war that costs years of peace and productivity in exchange for a victory that, when it finally arrives, feels hollow compared to everything sacrificed to achieve it. Sun Tzu's principle is this: speed is the essence of war. Strike decisively, win quickly, and where you cannot win quickly, be very certain the prolonged fight is worth its cost before committing to it. He also introduces in this chapter the concept of living off the enemy's land, what modern strategists call resource acquisition from the environment. The most sustainable military campaign, Sun Tzu argued, was one that replenished itself from its conquests rather than depending entirely on supply lines from home. In business terms, the most sustainable growth strategy is one that generates cash flow from its early customers to fund its later expansion, rather than depending entirely on external capital that can be cut off at any moment by decisions made in someone else's boardroom. Build, win quickly where you can, consolidate, fund the next move from the proceeds of the last, and never commit to a prolonged conflict without first calculating honestly whether you can sustain the cost of winning it. Chapter 3 contains what is arguably the single most quoted line in all of The Art of War, the line that more than any other captures the essential genius of Sun Tzu's thinking. Supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. Read that again. The highest form of victory is not winning the battle. It is making the battle unnecessary. This is a principle so counterintuitive to our competitive, conflict-oriented culture that most people encounter it and move on without truly absorbing its implications. We are trained to fight, to compete, to engage, to out-argue, outperform, out-hustle. We treat every competitive situation as a battle to be won through superior force. But Sun Tzu understood something deeper. Fighting is expensive. Even when you win, you bear the cost of the fight. Depleted resources, damaged relationships, exhausted soldiers, weakened systems. The army that wins a bloody battle is not in the same condition as the army that won without fighting at all. The supreme strategist does not compete for a market. They redefine the market. They do not fight for a customer. They create an offering so compelling that the customer's loyalty is never in doubt. They do not argue for a position. They build a reputation so authoritative that their position is assumed. Steve Jobs understood this. Apple did not compete in the MP3 player market. They redefined it so completely with the iPod and iTunes ecosystem that the existing competitors were not beaten. They were simply made irrelevant. Amazon did not compete with bookstores. They made the bookstore model itself obsolete. The strategist who must fight has already partially failed. The supreme strategist never has to. Sun Tzu also introduces in this chapter his famous hierarchy of military targets. Attack the enemy's strategy first. Attack his alliances second. Attack his army third. And only as a last resort, attack his cities. The application is direct. In business, disrupt your competitor's strategy before engaging their products, undermine their partnerships before fighting them on price, and only engage in direct head-to-head competition, the siege of cities, as an absolute last resort. Because direct competition is the most expensive, the most uncertain, and the least elegant form of victory available. Chapter 4 introduces a distinction that separates reactive thinking from strategic thinking. The good fighters of old first put themselves beyond the possibility of defeat and then waited for an opportunity to defeat the enemy. First, invincibility, then victory. Most people approach competition in the opposite sequence. They look for opportunities to win before ensuring they cannot lose. They reach for the trophy before building the foundation that makes reaching sustainable. Sun Tzu says, secure yourself first. Make your position unassailable. Build your defenses, your reserves, your systems, your team, your financial resilience to a level where no single setback, no market shift, no competitor move, no personal crisis can take you down. And then, wait, patiently, for the opportunity that the enemy's weakness eventually creates. Because weakness in an opponent always appears. Markets shift, competitors overextend, leaders make mistakes. Strategies that worked yesterday become obsolete. The window opens, it always opens, for the strategist who is in a position to exploit it. But only for the strategist who has not already been weakened by premature aggression, impatient expansion, or the failure to secure their own position first. This is the principle behind Warren Buffett's investment philosophy. He does not chase opportunities. He builds an unassailable financial position, extraordinary cash reserves, diversified holdings, conservative leverage, and waits for Mr. Market to offer something extraordinary at a reasonable price. He does not create the opportunity. He positions himself to recognize and exploit it when it appears. Security first, opportunity second. Build the foundation, then wait for the window. Chapter 5 explores one of Sun Tzu's most sophisticated concepts, the management of energy in military operations and the relationship between direct and indirect force. He introduces the concept of Zheng and Qi, the direct and the indirect, the conventional and the unconventional, the expected and the unexpected. In battle, Sun Tzu says, use the direct force to engage and the indirect force to win. The direct force pins the enemy. It occupies their attention, their resources, their defensive formations. And then the indirect force, the unexpected element, the flanking maneuver, the creative stroke that comes from an unanticipated direction, delivers the decisive blow. In modern business, your core product is the direct force. It engages the market, establishes your position, builds your revenue base. But your innovation, your unexpected pivot, your blue ocean move, your disruptive new offering is the indirect force, the one that wins the market while your competitors are focused on defending against your conventional attack. Apple's direct force was computers. Their indirect force was music, the iPod and iTunes ecosystem that flanked every competitor in the technology space and captured a market nobody had seen them coming for. Amazon's direct force was books. Their indirect force was cloud computing, AWS, which now generates more profit than the entire retail operation. Sun Tzu also introduces in this chapter the concept of momentum, Shi, which he describes as the potential energy of a well-positioned force released at precisely the right moment. Like a crossbow fully drawn, like a boulder at the top of a mountain, the energy is stored, accumulated, and then released with devastating precision at exactly the right moment. The strategist manages momentum. They accumulate it patiently, building resources, reputation, positioning, and relationships, and release it decisively when the conditions are right. Not scattered, not premature. Stored, and then released. Chapter 6 is where Sun Tzu becomes almost uncomfortably practical. Whoever is first in the field and awaits the coming of the enemy will be fresh for the fight. Whoever is second in the field and has to hasten to battle will arrive exhausted. First mover advantage, in 2 sentences, written 25 centuries before the term was coined. But Sun Tzu goes further. He says the supreme commander does not simply arrive first. They shape the battlefield. They choose the terrain. They determine where the battle will be fought and under what conditions. They force the enemy to respond to their agenda rather than setting their own. In business, this is the art of market definition. The company that defines its market, that shapes how customers, investors, and competitors understand the space, has an extraordinary strategic advantage over those who simply compete within a market someone else defined. He also introduces the principle of attacking where the enemy is weak and avoiding where they are strong. A principle so obvious it sounds trivial until you observe how rarely it is actually applied. Most businesses compete head-to-head with established players on the established players' terms. They fight for the same customers through the same channels with similar products, competing at the point of maximum enemy strength. Sun Tzu would consider this military insanity. Find the undefended ground, the underserved customer, the overlooked geography, the channel the incumbent has neglected, the problem that everyone in the industry acknowledges but nobody has solved. That is where you attack. Not because you are afraid to fight directly, but because the intelligent general does not fight where they will lose. Chapter 7. Maneuvering. The difficulty of tactical maneuvering. Chapter 7 opens with a rare moment of candor from Sun Tzu. Nothing is more difficult than the tactics of maneuvering. For the first time in the text, he acknowledges that strategy is hard, that the principles he has been laying down are not mechanical formulas that produce automatic results. They are frameworks for navigating genuine difficulty, and the maneuvering phase, where strategic vision meets operational reality, is where most plans break down. Because maneuvering requires the ability to do 2 things simultaneously that are naturally in tension: move decisively and maintain coordination. The army that moves fast enough to surprise the enemy frequently outruns its supply lines, loses its formation, and arrives in a state too disorganized to exploit the advantage its speed created. The army that maintains perfect coordination moves too slowly to achieve surprise. The genius of the great commander is the ability to manage this tension, to move fast enough to seize opportunity while maintaining enough coordination to exploit it. In organizational terms, the startup that moves fast enough to capture market opportunity frequently outpaces its operational infrastructure, its hiring processes, its quality controls, its customer service capacity, and the speed that drove initial growth becomes the disorganization that destroys sustainable growth. Sun Tzu's solution is not to slow down. It is to develop the organizational capacity to move fast in a coordinated way, through clear communication, through distributed decision-making, through a shared understanding of strategic intent that allows individual units to act independently without losing coherence. The principle for modern leaders: speed requires infrastructure. If you want to move fast without breaking things, build the systems that make fast movement coherent before you accelerate. Chapter 8 is about the danger of rigidity, the military commander who knows only one way to fight, who applies the same tactics regardless of terrain or circumstance, who cannot adapt when reality departs from the plan. There are roads which must not be followed, armies which must not be attacked, towns which must not be besieged, positions which must not be contested, commands of the sovereign which must not be obeyed. That last clause, commands of the sovereign which must not be obeyed, is perhaps the most radical thing Sun Tzu wrote. The idea that a commander on the ground, with superior local knowledge, must sometimes override the orders of a distant authority whose understanding of the situation is incomplete. This is the argument for distributed authority in modern organizations. The frontline employee who understands the customer's actual need must sometimes override the corporate policy that was written without that specific situation in mind. The field commander must sometimes act on their own judgment rather than waiting for orders from a headquarters that cannot see what they can see. But Sun Tzu immediately balances this with a warning about the dangers of character flaws in leadership. He identifies 5 dangerous faults in a commander: recklessness, which leads to destruction; cowardice, which leads to capture; a hasty temper, which can be provoked by insults; a delicacy of honor, which is sensitive to shame; over-solicitude for men, which exposes the leader to worry and trouble. Each of these faults, Sun Tzu says, is a weapon in the hands of a skillful enemy. Know your own fault, because your enemy will find it and exploit it before you have had a chance to hide it. The most important strategic intelligence is self-knowledge. Know your weaknesses before your enemy does. Chapter 9. The Army on the March, Reading the Signs. Chapter 9 is the most operationally specific section of The Art of War, a detailed guide to reading the environment, interpreting signs, and making intelligent inferences from available information. Sun Tzu describes how to read terrain, mountains, rivers, marshes, plains, and how to position an army advantageously within each. But embedded within this operational detail are deeper principles about observation and intelligence. If soldiers are seen whispering together in small groups, the general has lost the confidence of his men. If there is disturbance in the camp, the general's authority is weak. If the soldiers stand leaning on their spears, they are faint from want of food. Sun Tzu is teaching his commanders to read the signs of reality, to look beyond what people say to what their behavior reveals, to use observation rather than report to understand the true state of affairs. This is the principle of management by walking around, the leader who learns more from an hour on the factory floor than from a week of board reports, the investor who learns more from visiting a company's operations than from reading its financial statements, the entrepreneur who learns more from watching customers interact with their product than from any survey or focus group. The world is constantly communicating its true state through signals that most people do not know how to read. The strategist reads them. And Sun Tzu adds a principle that every leader should tattoo on the inside of their eyelids. Ponder and deliberate before you make a move, but once you have decided, move with speed and without hesitation. The deliberation and the decisiveness are not contradictions. They are sequence. Think slowly, act fast. Chapter 10. Terrain. Know your ground. Chapter 10 classifies terrain into 6 types, each requiring a different strategic approach, and uses the discussion of terrain to make a broader point about the relationship between external conditions and strategic choice. The commander who advances without coveting fame and retreats without fearing disgrace, whose only thought is to protect his country and do good service for his sovereign, is the jewel of the kingdom. This is Sun Tzu's definition of the ideal leader. Not the one who seeks glory, not the one who fears failure, but the one whose ego is entirely subordinated to the mission, who advances when advancing serves the objective and retreats when retreating serves it, without personal pride contaminating either decision. This is perhaps the most psychologically demanding principle in the entire text, because our culture celebrates the advance and stigmatizes the retreat. We reward boldness and punish caution. We construct narratives of relentless forward motion and treat strategic withdrawal as weakness or failure. But Sun Tzu understood something that our culture consistently gets wrong. The retreat that preserves your army to fight another day is strategically superior to the advance that destroys it. The business that pivots away from a failing strategy, admitting honestly that the original approach was wrong and changing course, is strategically superior to the one that doubles down out of ego and burns through its remaining capital defending an indefensible position. Know when to advance, know when to retreat, and make both decisions based on strategic reality, not personal pride. That is the jewel. Chapter 11 is the longest in the art of war and the most operationally complex. Sun Tzu identifies 9 types of ground, 9 different strategic situations, each requiring a fundamentally different approach. Dispersive ground, fighting on home territory where soldiers are tempted to scatter to their families. Do not fight here. Facile ground, ground just inside enemy territory, still shallow. Do not stop here. Contentious ground, ground that is advantageous to either side. Do not attack here. Open ground, ground where both sides can move freely. Do not let your formations be broken here. Intersecting highways ground, ground that connects multiple states. Form alliances here. Serious ground, deep in enemy territory with many fortified towns. Plunder here. Difficult ground, mountains, forests, difficult terrain. Move quickly through here. Hemmed-in ground, ground entered through narrow gorges with difficult retreat. Here, resort to stratagem. Desperate ground, where survival requires immediate battle. Here, you must fight. The principle underlying all 9 situations is the same. Your strategy must be determined by your situation, not by your preference, your habit, or your fixed idea of how things should be done. The leader who fights the same way on dispersive ground as on desperate ground will lose on both. The executive who applies the same growth strategy in a bull market as in a recession will destroy value in both. Read the situation, determine what it demands, and adapt completely, without attachment to what worked last time. Chapter 12, The Attack by Fire, Controlled Destruction. Chapter 12 addresses the use of fire as a weapon, and in doing so, introduces a principle about the use of destructive force that has profound modern applications. Sun Tzu identifies 5 ways to attack with fire: burning soldiers, supplies, equipment, arsenals, and supply lines. But his deeper point is about the relationship between the commander and destructive force. The enlightened ruler is heedful, and the good general is full of caution. This is the way to keep a country at peace and an army intact. He is warning against the intoxication of destruction. The general who wins a great victory and then, drunk on success, continues burning and destroying beyond what the strategic objective requires, this general creates enemies from neutrals, destabilizes the very territory he sought to control, and plants the seeds of future conflict in the ashes of his present triumph. The principle for modern business and leadership is about restraint in success as much as courage in adversity. The company that wins a competitive battle and then crushes its defeated rival completely, eliminating every person, every product, every trace of the competitor, frequently discovers that it has created martyrs, galvanized opposition, and generated regulatory scrutiny that a more measured approach would have avoided. Win decisively, and then stop. Consolidate. Show magnanimity where it costs you little and earns you much, because the war after the war is won not by destruction, but by integration. Chapter 13. The Use of Intelligence. Information is everything. Sun Tzu saves his most modern-sounding chapter for last. Chapter 13 on the use of spies and intelligence is a masterclass in information strategy that reads as if it were written for the 21st century rather than the 5th century BCE. Hence, it is only the enlightened ruler and the wise general who will use the highest intelligence of the army for purposes of spying and thereby achieve great results. Knowledge of the enemy's dispositions can only be obtained from other men. The commander who does not know the enemy's condition simply because he begrudges the expenditure of 100 pieces of gold in intelligence is utterly devoid of humanity. Sun Tzu identifies 5 types of intelligence agents: local spies, inward spies, converted spies, doomed spies, and surviving spies, and describes the sophisticated networks through which intelligence is gathered, verified, and acted upon. But the deeper principle is this: every competitive advantage in every domain ultimately rests on information asymmetry. The investor who knows something the market does not know. The entrepreneur who understands the customer's true need before any competitor does. The negotiator who knows the other side's walkaway point. The leader who understands their organization's true morale and capacity rather than the sanitized version that travels up the hierarchy. The commander who acts on intelligence wins. The commander who acts on assumption loses. And the most dangerous assumption of all, the one that has destroyed more armies, more businesses, and more careers than any other, is the assumption that you already know enough. You do not know enough. Nobody ever knows enough. The world is constantly changing. Competitors are constantly adapting. Markets are constantly shifting. The intelligence that was current last month may be dangerously obsolete today. Invest in intelligence, relentlessly, continuously, without begrudging the cost. Because in a competitive world, what you know and what your opponent does not know you know is the ultimate strategic weapon. 13 lenses through which Sun Tzu examined the nature of conflict, competition, strategy, and human nature. Let us bring the essential principles together one final time. Plan thoroughly and honestly before you engage. Assess your strengths, your weaknesses, your timing, and your terrain with clear eyes and no self-deception. Win quickly where you can. The prolonged battle exhausts everyone and ultimately serves no one. Break the enemy's resistance without fighting. The supreme victory requires no battle at all. Secure yourself first. Build the unassailable foundation before reaching for the trophy. Use direct force to engage and indirect force to win. The unexpected stroke from the unanticipated direction delivered at the moment of maximum enemy vulnerability. Attack weakness, avoid strength. Find the undefended ground and make it yours before anyone knows you are coming. Adapt completely to your situation. There are no universal tactics, only universal principles applied with situational intelligence. Read the signs of reality. The world is constantly telling you its true state through signals that most people are too busy or too comfortable to notice. Know when to advance and when to retreat, and make both decisions from strategic clarity rather than personal pride. And above all, know. Invest in intelligence about your competitors, your market, your customers, and most importantly, yourself. Because in every domain of human competition, the ultimate advantage belongs not to the strongest or the fastest or the most aggressive. It belongs to the one who sees most clearly. Sun Tzu closed his masterwork with these words that echo as powerfully across 25 centuries as the day they were written. The general who wins a battle makes many calculations in his temple before the battle is fought. The general who loses a battle makes but few calculations beforehand. Calculate, plan, know. And then, when the moment is right, when the position is secured, when the indirect stroke is ready to be delivered, act with absolute decisiveness. That is the art of war, and it is, as it has always been, entirely yours to master. Which of Sun Tzu's 13 principles hit closest to your life right now? Drop the chapter number in the comments. I read every single one. Share this audiobook experience with someone who is in a battle right now, in their business, their career, their life, and does not yet have the strategic framework to navigate it. Subscribe to the audiobook space for a new experience every week. Until next time, know yourself, know your enemy, win without fighting if you can.